And welcome to the Great Deception Podcast. I'm your host, Matt. Thanks for joining me. One of the things I would like to do tonight is follow up on our last episode about Tartaria. And this is probably going to be the last one for a little bit because there's a couple other things I want to dive into. And I got some stuff going on in my personal life. I might be moving, so I might be hit or miss here on doing some deep dives in the next couple weeks, depending on how that goes. But I'll keep you posted. Monday Night Master Debaters will continue to roll regardless. And everyone seems to be enjoying it. So we're going to keep rolling with that and see where we go from there. Now, couple shout outs I want to give. Again, guys, I just want to pass the word around on podcasts that I enjoy, that you guys might enjoy. And some of the ones I listened to this week, one of my favorite ones I just finished today was Into the Apocalypse with Adam and Chud from Deborah Gets Red Pilled. They were with Emmanuel Kingman, and they did an episode called Y'all Need Jesus. Now, it's not what you think it is. Go listen to it. You will not regret it. It was a very good episode. My man Moral Bob, again, hidden in plain sight, did another part with Brandon Peacock from Dangerous World podcast on anarchy and statism. Jack over at Conspiracy and Just a Coincidence is doing a multi-part series on the book Rulers of Evil, which we're going to do also on this show, because it's an amazing book about the Jesuits and some other stuff. My buddy Nico and Random Randy from the Red Thread podcast, they did an episode on, or they're going to do a series on the Lord of the Rings. So go check out Nico and Randy over at Upstate Unconventional. I know Nico posted it. I'm sure Randy did as well. So the Red Thread podcast is Randy's, and and Nico's got the Upstate Unconventional. So those are a couple of them. Ryan's doing his thing with some really cool stuff. Go check out his work. Too. I listen to his obviously every week. He's one of my favorite podcasts to listen to. And then my buddies over at Wicked Planet, they're still doing it. So go check it out. Oh, and I forgot my favorite episode of the week. Sorry, Kyle. The Big Dumb Podcast, where my man Kyle did it with Meta Andy, and they kind of went over old world stuff. And man, was it a fun episode. So go check out Kyle over at the Big Dumb Podcast. That was a really fun episode. I'm sure you guys will enjoy it, especially if you're enjoying this stuff. So with that said, there's a few shout outs to my friends that I respect all their work. So go check them out, give them some love, give them some reviews. Everybody's just doing this for fun right now, so show them some support. Now, tonight we're going to take a look at a couple chapters from books that I found. One is from a book from 1780 called Russia, or a Complete Historical Account of All Nations, which composed that empire, volume 2. So that title isn't long enough. Basically, it's a breakdown from 1780 of all the different Tartarian factions in Russia. Now, I will preface this by saying, notice the year it was written, 1780. This is after the Pugachev rebellion. So Catherine had already ordered, essentially Pugachev to be destroyed. You're going to also start seeing, the Tartarians themselves destroyed. So you have to take this. This could be one of two things. It could be a very true, actual account of the Tartars at this time and a little bit of their history, or it could be the Tartars they want us to know based on the narrative. So I always throw that out to you. I'm never going to tell you it's this way or it's that way. I will tell you how I think, but I also want you to consider the other side of it. So this first, and then the other book we're going to do is a chapter called Russia and Her Colonies from 1952. And that deals with the elimination, basically, of the Crimean Tartars. And that happened much later in time, much more recent. So I found that interesting, especially considering all the stuff that goes on. And guys, if you want to go on a deep historical dive, look into the Crimean territory. I mean, you go back to the times of Constantine and even before. And it's just there's so much activity, so much history there, so many times it's been rewritten that the people there, though, that's where you want to go for the story. You don't want to go to these books a lot of the times for the narratives. You want to go down to the people, and that's and those numbers are dwindling too. They've done a number on that as well. But let's take a look here at the first book, okay? And this is Russia and or a complete historical account of all nations which composed that empire. All right, volume 2. So what we have here, and for those listening, I'm going to describe it. Those watching on whatever platform you're watching on, you'll see this is a list of the table of contents, all the different nations. You have Tartar nations in general, and that's what we're going to review tonight. Then it goes into the Tartars of Kazan and Orenburg, the Taurolines, the Tartars of Tobolsk, which was the capital of Muscovite Tartary, the Tartars of Tornik. It goes on and on and on, and it's all the different tribes or nations, which they called them at the time, of Russia at the time. It goes into even the Yakuts you'll see over here. You'll see the Cyan Tartars. So there's all these different, it's almost 400 pages of info. So if you're really interested in this, I got it out on the Wayback Machine. So let's take a look here. Now, one of the things that's a pain in the ass about this is that they have an S that looks like an F sometimes, and then they'll have the regular S. So if I stutter a little bit, that's likely the case, because if you look right here, this is the word stocks, and the first letter looks like an F, and then you'll also see a normal English S at the end. So it's from the time it was written. So bear with me. So here we go. The numerous original flocks of Tartar nations settled in the empire of Russia and envisions the distinguished by different names. One, they were called Tartars, another Turks, Turkomans, but the 3-letter denominations are most frequent. The Tartars who have written the history of their nation derive them from a certain Turk or Turk and Tatar, his grandson. Among these writers, oh boy, Abu Ghafi Dorkin is the most worthy of credit. Guys, got to bear with me on these names. And according to him, Turk is the father and founder of the people. Okay, so he's the founder of the Tartars. One of the numerous grandsons was Tatar, a great hero and establisher of some considerable hordes. This proud and haughty people have since imagined the name Turk and Tatar must necessarily communicate, to all here in the master and sovereign. The Yakuts even have placed the hero Tatar among their gods. In the process of time, however, the Tartars were not so blinded by their patriotic arrogance as to hinder them from perceiving that several among the predominant nations of those parts had an idea very different of this famous name of Tatar, and that some even went so far as to use the term in a humiliating sense. The Chinese, not less haughty than themselves, confer upon all their neighbors, whether Tartars or Mongols, the injurious name of Tata or Tadfi, a word derived from the Chinese verb tatana, which signifies an to assemble in troops, generally in a bad sense, for the purposes of ravage, plunder, or rebellion. Among the Finnish nations, the Tartars in general bear the name Snas. Ancient history commonly confounds the Tatars with Mongols, and this is an interesting point here. So they're gonna make the distinction between Tatars and Mongols. It is probable that this error has arisen from the proximity of the habitations of these two peoples. The Tartars have been alternately subjects and allies of the Mongol. Khan Chinggis, the founder of the Tartarian monarchy, was by birth a Mongol, made his first excursions with Mongols, and all subsequent expeditions had always great many of them in numerous armies of Tartars, which he commanded, with whom the Mongols were so fixed that in time they lost both their name and their original language. The Tartars themselves go as far as to maintain that Tartar and Mongol, the father of these two nations, were twin brothers. So what they're saying is they're two in the same, essentially, but they're separate. Makes sense? So nevertheless, these people have each of them a language absolutely different from the other. And if one may judge from the majority, very style of their countenance has no resemblance. Okay, so they're saying they're very different types of people. Even intermediate races are very distinguishable among them, who seem to be linked by which they are connected. Of this sort are the Tartars of Kusnek, the Yakuts, and though the appearance may have been occasioned by the consequence of wars, when the people made this mixture, either by intermarriages of the conquerors amongst the vanquished, or by the violations of their women. So basically, they're saying there a lot of the interbreeding was not by choice. It was either by conquest or by rape. So not exactly how you want to start or propagate your nation. And when you hear things like that, and when you start hearing about some of the hordes and the behaviors of these people, and it makes you think along the lines of what Immanuel Kingman was saying about Tartarus, or it being the land or the kingdom of Tartar, which, you go back to Greek, and Tartarus is the abyss. So we got to keep this two sides of it in mind when we're looking at this stuff, because it's definitely not straightforward. As we know, they invert everything. So you have to take bits and pieces of this and try and put the puzzle together, which is not easy. And that's why I kind of do this podcast. I like digging into these things and seeing what we can pull out of it. And sometimes there's nothing, but I really feel like this document kind of gives you a better idea of some of the nations. So it says the Tartar hordes are made up of ancient inhabitants of Great Tartary, as the geographers call it. That is the great extent of territory between the mountains of Siberia and the East Indies, from the river of the Ural and to Mongolia, one part of which is now comprehended in Sungaria. Now, you'll see right there, by calling it the Ural, they're already, because that's the Yayak, right? And that was renamed by Catherine because the Ural helped out Pugachev. Okay, so these hordes are at the present in possession of no more than this part of the ancient country, situated towards the southwest of Bukharia, Yiva, and some of the other small states thereabout. Now here, in the early times of the Tartars and Mongols were governed by but one sovereign who ruled over a united kingdom. But after the death of Khan Oghuz, the state was dismembered. Khan Chinggis subdued the greatest number of these hordes and founded them the Tartarian monarchy, where he reigned according to the Christian era from the year 1204 to 1229. He extended his conquests from the bank of the Caspian beyond Mount Caucasus to the Euxine Sea. All right, so this is saying Genghis Khan expanded the empire. He built the Tartarian monarchy in the early 1200s. Okay. Now that's an interesting time frame, because if you consider that, okay, that if we look at it, and they're going by these hordes, they're just these hordes that are going through the countryside, slaying, taking over towns. And a lot of times after they did their initial raid of the town, if they didn't burn it to the ground, they would allow that town to rule itself as long as it paid its tribute. And that was, a big part of their income too. So let's look. On the death of the Chinggis, though, his sons and the nobles of the empire divided his conquests, and everyone endeavored to enlarge what fell to their share. Okay. The most famous amongst the descendants of Chinggis was Khan Bati, who, towards the middle of the 13th century, by his prudence, valor, good fortune, and severity, has obtained a distinguished reputation. He settled a horde near the Ural called the Adachik, by the Tartars, and by others Yaik. This horde consisted of several separate septs, which Bati had the address to unite. It is still called the Great Horde, and by the Russians, the Golden Horde. So this is where you'll hear about the Great Horde and Golden Horde. This was just after Genghis Khan. With this horde, Bati subdued the Bulgarian Empire upon the Volga, and out of whose ruins he formed the kingdoms of Kazan and Astrakhan. He made himself master of the part of the Russian Empire, a great way beyond the borders of which he penetrated to the terror of Poland and other neighboring states. In the year 1240, the incursions of the Tartars into Silesia brought a total ruin upon the minds of that country. After him, towards the end of the 14th century, Tamerlane distinguished himself by his numerous armies, by his victories, and the devastations he spread around him everywhere, without accepting even accepting the Tartar hordes. The Tartars give Tamerlane the surname Temir Apokal, or Abokal. Akbal, yeah, I can't pronounce that, which signifies old man of iron or white beard of iron. The principal part of southern Siberia was seized on by the horde of the Kurju. Wherever the Tartars came, they not only subdued the former inhabitants, but destroyed the greatest number of them, and drove them from their temperate regions, and obliged them to seek shelter from oppression in less hospitable climes. To maintain and people the conquered provinces, it was a necessity to fend their Tartar colonies, which occasioned an almost total transplantation and migration of the races of the Mongols and Tartars. So basically, they're just spreading themselves all over. It was not till the beginning of the 15th century that the Tartar power began to give way. The Golden Horde was weakened by intestine divisions, sounds like internal divisions. And notwithstanding, the horde of the Naga availed itself of this by increasing its people and extending its territory, yet they were often conquered by the Russians and the Chinese till about the middle of the 16th century, when the arms of the Russians were completely victorious and the immense empire of the Tartars finally subverted. Now, this is interesting because this is saying the 15th century. I guess this is the end of the Tartar Empire, right? As we look at the things. And now what is this going to do? Who takes over in the 17th century? 1613 is when the Romanovs begin. So they're going to go right here. Tsar Ivan Vasilovich, Ivan the Great, essentially, after having conquered the Tartarian kingdoms of Kazan and Astrakhan, the former, so he took Kazan in 1552 and Astrakhan in 1554 and made them provinces of his empire, and proceeded to extend his conquests over Siberia, where Khan Kutshalom reigned. At the present number of independent Tartary hordes is not great. There weren't a lot of them, he's saying, at this time. They consist of only those that still inhabit the southwest part of the ancient Great Tartary, towards the frontiers of Persia, of India, of Sungaria, the great horde of the Kyrgyzstians, the Bukharians, the, Gavinchis, the Karakalpaks, the Tromanes, the Tashkentchins, the Turuktans, and the Araline. Besides these, there are still several hordes, of which the Nogas Tartar near the Black Sea, which by the peace concluded between Russia and the Porte in 1774, were declared independent on the Ottoman dominion, as well as the Tartars of the Crimea and those of Bessarabia. But all these hordes are so feeble that they are obliged to seek protection of each other or of their neighbors as circumstances direct. The other hordes are partly subjects and partly allies to Russia, the Ottoman Porte, the Great Mughal, China, and Persia, especially before the troubles of the last kingdom. Those hordes alone acknowledge the obedience to Russia and are object to the present undertaking. So what you'll see here is they've decimated, according to this, they've decimated the hordes to the point where they basically can't defend themselves, and they're relying on one another and the big states for support. So he goes on to say the Tartarian nations established within the Empire of Russia dwell along the northern coast of the Caspian Sea and the Euxine, and the northern side of the Mount Caucasus, the steppes, those vast deserts extending from the easternmost part of the river Ural quite to Sungaria. The whole southern side of the last mentioned river, the mountains, and the frontiers of Siberia towards the south, the steppes which reach the river Tobol, and the other side of the Yenisei. And lastly, the deserts situated toward the middle of the Lena. Okay. It is, moreover, to be remarked that a considerable number of Tartar colonies are distributed among the habitations of the Russians, especially in the governments of Kazan, Orenburg, and Tobolsk. Now, those were three of the biggest cities from our last episode on Tartaria, right? Those were essentially the places that Pugachev was trying to get to, because he wasn't really getting to Moscow or St. Petersburg. So it says, near Yenisei are still to be seen remnants of different people whose manner of life and particular customs have a great resemblance with those of the Tartars, but they are mistaken who imagine them to be Tartars of Krasnoyarik, without reckoning these last, of whom the number is still but small. The Tartars taken in general are, next to the Russians, the most numerous people of the empire. So they're saying there's still a lot of number of these people. They're just kind of spread out. The Tartars have been in possession of all countries above mentioned, at least the greatest part of each. Ever since the Tartarian Empire was in its splendor, and all of them abound in monuments of the former power. So there had to be, they're saying right here, it was monuments of their former powers. There were physical monuments there. Remains of ditches and ramparts are frequently met with, and heretofore either surrounded small towns now quite demolished, or were designed for the defense camps, forts, or castles, the vestiges of which are often to be discovered upon the spot, as well as other traces of decayed importance. Now, what this sounds a lot like are star forts, right? It says it had ditches and ramparts, right? the ditches with the walls. Now, this could be just basic castles, but we're beyond the point of castles now. This was the era where, supposedly if we're looking 1500s, this is when the star forts are on the rise. And we're talking 1700s right now. So, I think, and it goes here, designed for the defense of camps, forts, or castles, the vestiges of which are often to be discovered upon the spot. So they've let them go, just dwindled away like they did with a lot of them. So it says the Russians give all these ruins the name, I'm not even going to try it, basically little towns demolished, star cities, right? That's exactly what this sounds like. Many of them are intolerable preservation and make some figure even at present. The Slobod, or Tartarian suburb of Kasimov on the Oka, seems to have been the residence of some Khan. In the midst of the ruins of that city is a round and elevated tower called in their language Misquer, a fort of temple or a building destined to devotion. Besides this, here are evidently walls of a palace, and in one of the masarets or burial places is a considerable mausoleum, all which edifices are built and sewn of stone and bricks. Okay, so this obviously, the major Tartar religion was, they were Muslim. So this sounds like a prayer tower, but it also sounds like a much larger complex. And they say it was all made of stone and bricks. From an Arabic inscription, we learn that the Khan of Shigali was buried there before 962D, year of the Hegira, or the 1520th year of the Christian chronology. All right. So near Mount Caucasus are still very considerable remains of Maldakar, a celebrated city of former times. In the environs of Astrakhan, the ruins of the ancient Astrakhan are very visible, with the rubbish and ramparts of another respectable town still exist near Tsitsaritsyn on the left shore of the Volga. A little below the mouth of the Kama, which empties itself into the above-mentioned river, are many superb monuments of the ancient Bagimova or Bulgari, consisting of towers, mosques, houses, sepulchres, all built of stone and brick. So what do we have here? We have lots of buildings. Okay, now we're starting to get the idea of these small city states, right? Independent little city states that they had built. And it says the oldest epitaphs had been there more than 11 centuries, and the most modern at least 400 years. So we're going way back, guys. This is saying that these buildings had been there up to 11 centuries, okay? Or some of them as little as 400 years. But this is okay. And what were we just told? We were just told the Tartars started in 1200, right? 1204 is when the Tartarian Empire, 1204 to 1229. Well, this just doesn't match up. This is contradicting itself right here, which is, I love looking at these things because it kind of does. Their story doesn't always line up. Okay, let's get back to it. Not far from hence, on the, Chicharicham, are found the ruins of somewhat more injured by the depredations of time. They are those of the Bulimir, an ancient, very considerable city of the Bulgarians, which afterwards falling to the Tartars, they erected upon its ruins a small town of Bilyarik. In the fortress of the Kazan is a monument of the ancient Tartarian kingdom of that name. Its lofty walls are broad, that they serve at present for ramparts, the turrets of which, as well as the old palace of Khan, are built of hewn stone. Okay, so again, this sounds like a complex that essentially is a star fort with turrets. They're not labeling it that way, but ascending from the river Kasanka, we meet the epitaphs and the strong ramparts of the old Kazan. Near the Ufa are cemeteries full of innumerable inscriptions and several sepulchral vaults. The ramparts of the Sabir, the ancient capital of Tartary, are still seen about Tabuk upon the Irotich. The lofty walls of the Tentora appear yet in Baraba, and near the mouth of the Ural are ditches of the city of Sarachik, not to mention the great number of the other sepulchres and ruins in Siberia, and especially all those to be met with the desert of the Kyrgyz, which abounds in the relics of opulent cities. So again, guys, we're not talking about these little villages. These are decadent cities, and we've seen it by the pictures of the architecture. Okay, these were not, some of these people were nomadic and were tribesmen and lived a different life, but there were people in these cities that lived lavish lifestyles. So the constitution and political state of the Tartarian nations with respect to the Empire of Russia are essentially the same as those with the Finnish nations. The Tartars are a free people, and they are permitted peaceably to enjoy the constitution of their ancestors. They elect their own chiefs always from among themselves, and generally out of their nobility, which consists of princes descended in the direct line from Chinggis, Bati, and others of their ancient sovereigns who have rendered themselves famous by their great exploits. At the beginning of their subjugation, they paid the crown of Russia the same tribute they had done before to their ancient khans. But since that, they have been much relieved, and their taxes are regulated now according to circumstances and the ability of the people. The yasak, or tribute, is generally very moderate, and there are some whole settlements of them who, instead of paying tribute, perform military service in quality of Cossacks. And the hordes that are in alliance or under protection neither serve nor pay. It is indeed to be observed with respect to their manner of life that the wandering Tartars, as well as the stationary, have an inexpressible veneration for the customs of their ancestors. So they're very into the past, their history, their tribe, their people, the history of their people, and carrying on traditions. The ancient Oriental simplicity is therefore perfectly preserved among them, which in its inseparable commitments, frugality and parsimony. The great economy is conspicuous in their manners, their habitations, their food, and their dress. Those that are rich have no train proportionate to their fortune, and the rest never incur an expense which it would be inconvenient to them to discharge. In like the manner of old national pride of the Tartars is maintained at this day in all its vigor. It is not only great that they boast of their genealogies, but even the meanest people, however destitute of their education, warm their imagination with raptures on the ancient splendor of the Tartarian Empire, and often break out wishes and ardent longings for the reestablishment of their former power, of sincerity of which their reiterated and bloody contests with the Bashkirs are so many proofs. So, right, they want to try to get back to that glory, but they can't come together and unify enough to get to a point where they can do it. And this is, basically what history is telling us was their downfall was, right around the 16th century, all of a sudden, between the Turk, the Ottomans, the Russians, the Finns, they all wanted to break these guys up and let them be, but, not let them gather together in this great Tartary. So he goes on to say, this is probably one chief motive why the government excludes the magistracy and the higher ranks in the army, all the stationary Mohammedan Tartars, amongst whom are men of great capacity, deficient neither in courage or understanding. As to the pagan Tartars, their perfect ignorance rends them scarcely fit for obedience, much less for command. So he's saying, the pagans, they're just ignorant. They can do what they want. But the Muslim Tartars, they want them in the higher ranks of the armies because they're, men of great capacity, great courage and understanding. So it's an interesting split you see right there, that the pagans are looked down upon. Now that, again, that may be true. It may be part of the narrative. The whole race of the Tartars speak the Turkic or Turkic language, which they call, let's see, the Turk Kaftani. The Mohammedans, who learn it young, both speak and write it in uniform and correct manner. They make use of the Arabic alphabet, and all their devotions and religious acts are in that language, though but a few priests speak it. So they're writing in Arabic, but not many priests speak it. Whenever they intend to write neatly, they use a pen made of reed with a sort of Chinese ink, which composition of which is as follows. They burn a quantity of millet to coal and then mix it with lampblack and gum water. The language of the Tartars is rich, flexible, mellifluous. They speak very low and with a tone or cadence. The pagan Tartars have neither schools nor writing, for which they reason their language suffers much and is considerably mixed with those of their neighbors, has degenerated into so many different dialects and undergone such alterations that they can hardly understand the other Tartars or be understood by them. Okay, so that's, and language is an interesting thing. And I found an article that I was reading in another book, and I'm not sure if it might have been, I don't know, one of the Russia books I was reading, but what they were talking about is the alphabet project that they did in Russia in or just pre-World War II. So like we saw here, how the Arabic alphabet was used by the Tartars. So what happened was the Russians came in and they were, well, the Bolsheviks came in and they wanted to have a oh man, I just totally lost my train of thought. So the Bolsheviks came in and they wanted to go to the higher learning and they wanted to embrace Latin. Okay, so they bring in and they force all the Arabs, all the Russians, or all the Tartars that speak Arab to now learn Latin, not only to learn to read it, to write it, to speak it. Well, then all of a sudden they have a change of heart about a decade later, and now they insist that everyone goes to Russian. Guys, think about that. Okay, so you're speaking one language, they ask you to go to Latin, which is a dead language at the time, mind you. Bring that back because it's an enlightened language. And then they're going to say, well, okay, Latin's not doing it. Let's go to Russian. Go back. We're going to all speak Russian. We'll have one uniform language here. Think about what that does to a history of a people. Okay. No better way to be able to erase, change, manipulate a history than by changing the language that it's in. Because what do you have to do then? You have to translate. And anytime an original text is translated to another language, it loses some of its meaning. It doesn't matter how accurate the translation is, nothing translates 100% between languages. So one of the best ways to divide a people, give them multiple languages. Do not allow them to communicate with others. And that's what happened to these pagan Tartars. They assimilated with so many different groups that by the end of it, they couldn't speak any of the languages that they're, the Tartar, the Arab anymore. They didn't speak Arabic anymore. And now they ran into a huge problem of communication. And this is, what do? Divide and conquer. And that's all part of it. So now here, what we're going to look at, this is from a book from 1952 called Russia and Her Colonies. Okay, and this is a section under the chapter of quote unquote liquidated peoples. This is a section called the Crimean Tartars, emigration of the Crimean Tartars, 1784 to 1917. So what are we looking at here? 1784 is just after Crimea was annexed by Russia, and we'll get into that a little bit here in a second, but that's the start point. And then 1917 should stick in everybody's head because that's when the Bolsheviks take over. Now, what is done to these people is quite interesting. So let's take a look. And again, remember what I said before about this region, this Crimean region, because of the access it has, is such a valuable region and has been fought over for centuries. For as long as the timeline's been in existence, I'm sure this region has been fought over. As soon as, there was travel by ship, this was a very important area in the region. So it says the liquidation of the Crimean Tartars as an ethnic group and their removal from the Crimean homeland by the Soviet government was but the last act of a long process of which had started when Empress Catherine II, who we talked about in the last episode, went against Pugachev, established a Russian protectorate over the Crimea in 1774 and eventually annexed it in 1783. Okay, so this is the same Catherine we were talking about, right? This is what it goes back to. The Crimean Tartars were no backward people in need of tutelage. They built up a military, vigorous, and economically flourishing state from the 15th century onwards. Gardening, the cultivation of vines and tobacco, silkworm cultivation, and cattle breeding had reached a high standard in the Crimea. The Crimean Tartars traded successfully with the Mediterranean world, exporting cotton and silk materials and great quantities of wheat. 100 years after the Russian conquest of Crimea, a Russian writer remarked sadly that only a few traces remained of the former wealth of the country when it was under Tartar rule. The reason for the decline was the gradual exodus of the Tartars. Their tragedy began immediately by the conquest of the Russians. So what you see here is what usually happens, right? Once you push those people out with the historical significance to the land, things go in decline. And this is no exception. So we look here. The first important trek to Turkey started in 1784. It is estimated that during the first emigration period between 1784 and 1790, out of the total population of Crimea of 1 million, about 300,000 Tartars had left the peninsula. So 30% of the people left. Think about that. A little less than 1 out of 3 people gone. It was not emigration alone that took the Tartars away from their homes on the Crimean coast. They were also victims of military political action, such as Russian authorities often applied to newly conquered peoples. They were transferred from strategically important positions where they lived to other parts where they could be more easily controlled. Sound familiar? This meant that a large number of Crimean Tartars were removed from the seacoast to the steppe inside the Crimean Peninsula. What do here, guys? Smart cities. They want to get you in because you're more easily controlled if you're in their environment. If you go out in the country They can't mess with you, really. I mean, they can, but they won't. You're not as easily controlled. You're outside a lot of their, you know, the debauchery of the city, the poisoning that they do in those cities. Okay. So here we go. This is meant for a large number of Crimean Tartars were removed from the seacoast, as we said, to the steppe inside. And again, the steppe is like desert, guys. So they went from these beautiful seafront property to the desert. Not exactly ideal. There were minor immigration movements in 1807 and 1811 at the time of the Russo-Turkish War, in which sympathies of the Crimean Tartars were with Turkey. So they sided with Turkey. They had ties with Ottomans, guys. It went back and forth. And Russia did this too. Russia and Turkey would fight back and forth for centuries. And this area was basically right in the middle of all this fighting. The second large-scale immigration wave set in after the Crimean War. In the years 1859 to 1863, more than 150,000 Tartars left the Crimea and the adjoining areas legally, while many thousands more departed illegally during the same time period. So you're figuring, I would say at least, you could go anywhere 20 to 50% left illegally. So you add on, okay, say 50,000, okay, third, like we went with before. So now that's 200,000. There was 300,000 in the first wave. That's 500,000 people, guys, in the 17 and 1800s that left this area. Think about that. That's almost half of the population. I mean, there's probably like 35% at the time, because obviously the population grew in the years in between, but that's a massive number. Okay. And they go on, well, this new wave of immigration affected 784 villages, including 687 in Crimea proper, many of which were left completely deserted by their inhabitants, ghost towns. Almost 700 in Crimea proper and almost 800 villages. That's, guys, this is mad. And we're talking in the 1860s. We're not talking millions and millions of people. They said there was 1 million people. So think about that. I mean, it's probably 3/4, if not more, of the villages. The second Tartar immigration was prompted by the oppressive rule which the Russian authorities had exercised against Tartars during the Crimean War. From the first, Russians regarded the Tartars as enemy agents. Cossack detachments closely guarded the Tartar population, closely guarded the Tartar villages, and made many indiscriminate arrests among the Tartar population. So they're just going around, rounding them up and arresting them. The Russian commander-in-chief, Prince Menshikov, had already suggested at the time of the Crimean War the wholesale transfer of the Tartar population into the interior of Russia, a measure which it was deemed impossible to take, but which the Soviet government put into effect almost 90 years later. So again, you have to understand that they think about these things, let it sit for a while, percolate on it, try and figure out how do we make it work, and then they enact it. Okay, so, and they said here 90 years later. Menshikov's suggestion was accepted only to the extent that the population of a few villages was removed, not to Siberia, but to the Kursk government in the central part of the European Russia. So what they're saying is, listen, we'll agree to it, but you can't just send these people to Siberia. You know, you can't just send them out in the middle of nowhere. After the Great Exodus of 1859 to 1863, Tartar immigration revived again after 1875, and about 18,000 Tartars left the Crimea between 1875 and 1892. This was an illegal immigration emigration, for by then the Russian authorities had realized the great economic disadvantages caused by the Tartars leaving and refused to issue passports to further immigrants. To fight Tartar emigration, the Tsarist government appointed in 1876 a commission to investigate the best means of keeping Tartars in Crimea. So basically, now they're creating a prison, right? They've realized, oh shit, the way we treated these people and all of that, now they don't want to stay here and be our slaves and work for us. So what we're going to do is, since it's hurting us economically, we're going to lock them in. We're not going to give them passports to get out. Basically, they can't leave the country. So no better means could be found than a stricter police terror against any Tartar suspected of intending to leave the country. All coercive measures proved to be inadequate. The emigration of the Tartars continued and stopped only after the October Revolution, which is in 1917. So we're still talking another 50 years. Oh no, we're talking 1875 to 1892. So we're talking another 25 years. Okay. Another 25 years, these people kept leaving. The colonization of the Crimea and the areas north of the peninsula, which had belonged to the Crimean Tartar Khanate and later the government of Taura, was extremely complicated process. To fill the gap left by the Crimean Tartars, the Russian government recruited colonists from several European nationalities. Apart from already mentioned German colonists, Bulgarian, Czech, and Estonian settlers came to the peninsula. Russian colonization proper in the Crimea advanced at an amazingly slow pace, with the result that at the time of the Crimean War, only 15,000 Russian colonists had made their home there during the second half of the 19th century, that Russia, Ukrainian, and Jewish colonists assumed greater proportions. So that's a very interesting look at things, because you see right there, the Soviets got their hands, so it was the Russians, got their hands on this, and they just kept squeezing and squeezing and squeezing. And the people, at first, it was a mass exodus. Then out of the people that are left, you had another exodus, and then they made it illegal to leave. So now what do? You have to stay there. You are essentially a prisoner in your own home, in your own country. And man, so we'll read a little bit more of this. It says here, the Tartar element in the Crimea had been reduced the above less than a quarter of the population when that territory became part of the Soviet Union. The question arose thereafter whether it was at all advisable to set up a Crimean Republic. In May of 1921, the Crimean Provincial Committee of the Communist Party decided by 96 votes to 52 that Crimea should be merely another province of Soviet Russia. Shocker. This decision was overruled by the central government in Moscow. On October 13th, 1921, Lenin and Kalinin signed the decree which brought the Crimea ASSR into being. The reasons prompting the Soviet government in founding the Crimean Republic were only too apparent. It was obvious that the Kremlin's gesture towards the Crimean Tartars would be welcome to all peoples of Russia to belonging to the Turco-Tartar group. Though they were small in number, the prestige of the Crimean Tartars ranked high in the Turkic and Muslim world. Thus, the most outstanding advocate of the pan-Turkism in Tsarist Russia was Crimean Tartar scholar Ismail Bey Gasprinsky. The newspaper which Gasprinsky edited demanded the creation of a unified Turkish language to be understood from Crimea to Herat and from Constantinople to Kashgaria. Okay, and that's where we start seeing It goes on to say, in reality, the Crimean ASSR has never lived up to Moscow's high expectations. It was never a propaganda asset as far as Turkey is concerned. The first thing that Turkey heard about the new republic was terrible famine, which had broken out in the winter of 1921 and 1922. The Crimean delegation even toured Turkey in 1922 to beg for help. The victims of the famine epidemic, which caused particularly heavy losses to the Tartar people. The propaganda value of the Soviet Crimea was further reduced by the active suppression of local nationalism, which started earlier than any other parts of the USSR. The main target of the persecution was the remnant of the nationalist Crimean Tartar Party, the Milli Furka. After the establishment of the Soviet regime, this party was officially disbanded, but its left-wing members had joined the communists in hopes that the existence of an autonomous Crimea would ultimately promote national Tartar aims. Okay, so it goes on, Tartar nationalists who had expected communist assistance in revival of the Tartar Crimean Khanate were soon disillusioned. The prime minister of the Crimea, Veli Ibragimov, the main protagonist of the Tartar nationalist tendencies, was arrested in 1927 as a class enemy and executed a year later. At the same time, the Soviet regime liquidated all manifestations of Tartar nationalism, also nicknamed Veli Ibragivism, in the cultural field. It purged the staff of the Crimean People's Commissariat of Education, banned nationalist textbooks, and stopped the publication of 2 literary journals in the Tartar language. Okay, so right there you go. It purged the staff of the Crimean People's Commissariat of Education, banned nationalist textbooks, and stopped the publication of 2 literary journals. That's it. That's the burning of the Crimean Tartars right there. It says Veli Ibragimov and his supporters were violently opposed to the arrival of the new agricultural colonists into their country. The suppression of Veli Ibragimovism thus cleared the way to a further strengthening of the non-Tartar element in the Crimean ASSR. So you're seeing it, right? They just basically wiped out these people, pushed them aside because they didn't need them anymore. They could bring in somebody else to replace them. As a result of the Russian, Ukrainian, and Jewish colonization, the proportion of Tartars in the total population of the Crimea fell between 1926 and 1936 from 26.2 to 23. So they were about a quarter of the people, and then they went to less than a quarter of the people. The Slav share in the population of the country went up accordingly, and there were in 1936 43.5% Russian and 10% Ukrainians in the Crimean ASSR. So look at this region, guys. It's a melting pot, right? Just all different peoples in this region now. In reality, the position of the Crimean Tartars was even more hopeless than these figures indicate. 500,000 people, mostly Russians, each year visited the Crimea, which is, after the Caucasus, the main health and holiday culture of the Soviet Union, and thus likewise contributed to the reinforced Slav character of the Crimean Republic. So it's a great spot for people to go. In fairness, it must be said that the Soviet regime tried to encourage in the interwar period such Crimean Tartar cultural activities as were harmless from the point of view of the communist state and party interests. Thus, the Crimean State Publishing House published Crimean Tartar folk tales in the Tartar original and also in Russian translations. Tartar folk, the latter appeared in a beautifully illustrated editions with enthusiastic prefaces, high praising the fine sense of humor and poetic gift of the Crimean Tartars. The collection and transcription of the Tartar folklores was carried out scientifically and systematically. Okay, so what did they do? They collected them, and then they're going to put out which ones they want. So let's see what they did. A team of research workers was busy for 16 years collecting these tales in remote villages, in the city bazaars, from lonely fishermen and wayfarers. No more than 500 tales and stories belong to Ahmet Aki Ozenbash cycle alone. They all deal with the life and deeds of the Tartar Till Uhlenspiegel and Ahmet Ake, who is depicted in some tales as a fool, in others as a wise man, and is the personification of the Crimean Tartar popular wit. Only one of the three announced volumes of the Ahmet Ake tales appears in the Russian translation during the winter of 1940. The book of Tartar folk tales became, within a few years of its publication, a kind of obituary of the Crimean Tartars, a document testifying to the vitality and gallantry of a people who have, through the ages, responded bravely and with a smile to all forms of adversity. So what you see there is, and you know, what we're going to see here, and we'll read this real quick, and that's it, because I can't take any more of this, just absolute destruction. But we'll look at right here. 1946. Okay. The Presidium of the Supreme of the Soviet of the RSFSR, Bakhmurov, who on June 25th, 1946, made the following points, which equally applied to Crimean Tartars and the Chechen people of the Caucasus. 1. Many Crimean Tartars, instigated by German agents, joined German volunteer detachments and waged armed struggle against Red Army units. They set up saboteur gangs to fight against the Soviet power in the rear. The bulk of the Crimean Tartar population did not offer opposition to these traitors. In reviewing the history of the Crimean Tartars, we have shown the real background to the abolition of the Crimean ASSR. The Russian Bolsheviks simply carried to a logical end the Crimea policy of Russian czars, aiming at assuring the triumph of the Russian over the Tartar cause. Okay, so what we've seen, guys, is just, you know, they don't want to I don't, it's just destruction, right? They destroyed it, and then on top of that, they hide it, cover it up, rewrite it. So what are the real story of the Tartars? Okay, was it this vast civilization? Now, from what we're seeing in the text from 1200 onward, not from the text, but from the time period in 1200 onward. And again, a lot of these texts are recent, relatively recent. They're after the erasure of the Tartars. What I would like to see, and what Andreas Zertis does a great job of, and he's much more versed in old Tartaria, the great Tartarian Empire that he talks about, which I haven't seen yet. I haven't seen any proof of. You know, I've seen these old buildings, and I've seen World's Fairs, and I've seen star forts, and all sorts of crystal palaces, and all sorts of different architecture, but I don't see anything that ties them to this people that everyone gives credit for, this great civilization. Now, could it be? Yes. I watch a lot of videos where people make connections that I don't necessarily agree with, because they're just kind of drawing straws. I don't see any concrete proof or any real evidence other than hearsay. And it's going to take more to sell me on it, because I do really, and looking at what Emmanuel Kingman talked about with Tartarus. Now, if we tie this in with the millennial reign, that might make sense, because you look at the millennial reign and 1,000 years of Christ, and then you have 1,000 years without him. Well, he left in what, 37 AD, according to many. So that would mean, and again, if you look at the timeline, right, where Fomenko says it could be manipulated by 1,000 years. So we could be in 2022, or we could be in 1022, or anywhere in between, because we really don't know. The calendar's been manipulated. You even noticed in these writings, they say that, you know, by the Christian account, there's different timelines. Different peoples have different calendars still. I know Ethiopians go by a different calendar. Chinese obviously go by a different calendar. So that's another thing that's been manipulated by the West, specifically by the Roman Catholic Church, the Vatican, the Jesuits, all those people. So we look at that millennial reign. Now that's interesting, because if we're in 1022, right, and Christ's gone for 1,000 years, that would mean the return would be in the ballpark of 1037, 1038, which means we are within 15 years of turning that tide back towards the millennial reign. Now, is that an immediate turn? No, because like he said, you have about 200 to 300 years, give or take, of transition into that reign. So we'd be transitioning from darkness to light. So we're looking at until about, 1250 to 1300, where you would start, it would still be this kind of mishmash back and forth, good, evil, good, evil. We're transitioning from the dark age to the millennial reign, and into the time of Christ. If again, and this, if you believe this, guys, I don't know what to think. I'm still stewing this all in my head, but this idea is very interesting considering what we're going through right now. So look at that. So if we're in 1022 and 1038 is where we're going, well, then we're in that time frame where things are starting to go. Now, will we see the fruits of it? No, but we're going to be in some chaotic times, and that's what we should expect for about 200 years. And that's exactly what this whole system says. Now, I don't know what to believe. What time frame are we in? We don't know. We've been told by a couple different calendar systems where approximately we may be. You listen to some people and they say that right now we're in 2012. What? Yeah, the decade slip. I don't know. But there's all these different things. Now you can get into, was there something to the Tartarians? Yes, I think there's still a lot that's been hidden from us, much like the giants in America. I think, a lot of American history, we say, oh, well, the Russians did this to their people. America, this history has been whitewashed to a T. They've written this narrative from day one. And you look at guys like H.H. Bancroft that went across the country out west, collecting any literature he could. And then all of a sudden he writes 30 volumes on the Old West, the natives, everything. He basically writes the history of it. One man. And that's how they do this. And then that's the narrative we're all taught and we're supposed to believe. And it covers up the true past. Right? I mean, there's proof of giants all over the United States. You look at the mounds all over the United States. You look at the pyramids all over the United States. There's something more to the story than what we've been told. And the Tartars are a perfect example. Why? Because we have proof they've been erased from history intentionally. Okay, we have CIA documents that I presented in the last episode. We have it in here, where in these documents where it says Russia just erased them. They wanted them gone, never to be mentioned again. And what you'll see is in some of the books that I came across, an interesting thing was when Alexander Pushkin was writing the history of Pugachev in the 1820s, 30s. I don't know the exact date offhand. He would go into these villages and try to talk about Pugachev, and these people, no, they, go silent. It's like a lot what you would see, kind of comparable to when the American troops were in Afghanistan, and they go into some of these villages, and people would run and hide because you don't want to be seen talking with them, coercing with them. And that's what, they were afraid of the government, because they showed the one thing that you're going to see. And I've been reading a little bit about the Khazars and Khazaria. And one of the things you see is that the Rus people were vicious. They were savages, willing to just slaughter at will. And they were not to be messed with. So Russia has a history. Now, you say Russia has look at all the other governments. I mean, America has a history. Look right now. I mean, go look at the Middle East. What country over there hasn't shed blood in the last decade, or on a daily basis, I should say? I mean, there's everything over there. But now let's get back to this region, the Balkan region, right? That's a Tartar, it's a Tartar hotbed. It's where you find the the Khazaria is in this region too. There is a lot that goes on in this region. And then you go listen to a guy like Ari Aslin, and he'll go as far as to say that, the original Jerusalem was in Russia. And, that's a very interesting take. One of the things that I read that I found interesting, and this is kind of just a wrap up of random Tartaria facts here. But one of the interesting things I found was that they were saying, Ivan the Terrible had this great library that's disappeared from history. And a lot of people are saying that may have been the Library of Alexandria, and that it was moved to Russia, and Ivan the Terrible claimed it, and then it disappeared. So could it be hidden in Russia? Who knows? It's just, guys, history is so fascinating. It's a lot like the Bible, right? I hear a lot of my friends say, man, if they taught us half the stuff that's in the Bible, the giants, the Nephilim, you had all these battles and all these amazing feats by people, I would have been a lot more into the Bible. But they don't teach you all that stuff. They want to teach you guilt and shame and hold you down. They don't want you to know about the possibilities of what took place in our history. And the best way to keep you down is to not know where you are, where you came from, who you came from, and in turn, who you are. And that's what they're doing. That's what they do by dividing you. Okay, by separating you from your fellow man and isolating you like they did for a good part of 2 years. They're breaking people. And that's all part of the plan. Break you down, make you dependent on the system. It's all going towards their transhumanist agenda. They want a digital world where you are just happy with what you are given. And look behind me. Those that are listening, I'm talking about the Court of Honor in Chicago. Guys, that existed. Look at how beautiful that is. And tell me that we don't need more of this. We don't need to understand how this was done. And by the way, I am looking into now the architects of the Chicago World's Fair. I'm doing some digging on them, and some of the buildings, trying to find some different pictures of buildings from back then. I got some good source materials from back then in the 1800s. I'm going to start digging through because, guys, there's something to this time frame, the 1850s, to the 1900s, that transition, the world's fairs, you're seeing, Tartaria being eliminated officially. You're seeing nations being created, right? You look at how many countries have been created since 1850. How many countries have a real history as they are today beyond 1850? Very few. Most countries' borders have changed, if not changed significantly and numerous times in that time frame. I mean, like I said the other day, I didn't know that Poland was removed from the map for about 100 years. And again, that's partially my ignorance, but I was into history, but I didn't realize that piece of it. So what do I recommend? I recommend you go read. Go do some digging on your own if this interests you. It will always be on the back burner here, and I'm going to take some more looks at Russian history a little bit more. The Romanovs, the Khazaria, the Bolshevik Revolution eventually. We'll look at all those in due time. Not in the near future here, I don't think, because there are a couple other things I do want to start taking a look at. I do have this kind of current thing I want to get out there pretty soon. It goes back more along the lines of what I did in the with the NASA document that I did with Ryan. Go check out that podcast. We reviewed a NASA document from like 2000 that shows a lot of stuff that's going on today, and this ties in with that because and then you also think about signature reduction, which we did just a couple episodes ago. That's another, under the U.S. military, 60,000 people that just fly under the radar. It's amazing. So we got some things in the works, but there's a few different show topics that I want to take a look at, like I said. And I have been looking at some more of I do want to take a look deeper into Chicago, see if we can find anything there and share that with you all. But I ask, hey, go check out my YouTube. I'm going to start building that up a little bit and start putting some, shorter videos with pictures that I find, maybe do a little voice along with it, ask you all some questions, get you thinking a little bit, talk about the architecture that we find. But I would like to get that out there. I'm going to put this episode over on YouTube as well. So you can go check it out over there. I would like to start getting some live videos on live sessions on YouTube, but I'm just not technically savvy yet. So I got to get there eventually. But like I said, guys, stay tuned. It may be hit or miss for the next couple weeks here with deep dives, just because, like I said, I got a bunch of stuff going on, and I got to take care of that and get that in order. And from there, we will get back on track eventually. Keep diving, keep digging into this stuff. I find it fascinating. I don't know about you, but I found a bunch of good old books, and it's a great place to start diving, start looking at some different topics. And that's the other thing. I don't want to beat Tartaria too much. I will put a link to this book in the show notes, so you can go check it out. I'll link you to the Wayback Machine. But as far as Tartaria, I think I'm good for right now. I'm kind of at a standstill with it. I don't know what to think in general. There are a couple people I'd like to talk to about it, and maybe we can line them up, and that would be a reason why I would keep talking about it. But for right now, I'm going to move on to some other stuff. Not getting away from the old world, because I definitely want to keep looking at some old architecture, and just the general fuckery that went on, specifically the 1800s. I am stuck in the 1800s right now. And that's a spot where things changed, late 1800s, or not even late, from the beginning of the 1800s throughout early 1900s. And now we are where we are today in this wonderful upside down world. So with that said, I want guys, do me a favor, please like, review, share, leave a comment. I don't care if it's good or bad comment, as long as you leave a review with, preferably 5 stars, and then you can say whatever you want about me. I don't care. But please share if you like it. My Instagram is heavily shadow banned. I mean, I get a handful of people looking at my posts. So I've pulled back from there, not investing as much energy there, because it's kind of a useless effort. I'll keep posting for the show. I'll keep putting out some cool stuff that I find along the way, but I'm not going to be, going nuts on Instagram these days, because every time it gets no traction whatsoever. So I'm basically speaking to myself. But with the show here, guys, I ask that you keep sharing it. We get the message out there, and it's not for me. This is an ego thing. This is about, getting people to open their minds and just start thinking. I've hit a few people that I didn't think would be interested in, a podcast, and I shared mine with them, and they're like, wow, this is interesting stuff, and since then we've had a couple different conversations about different topics I've talked about, which is exactly why I did this show, guys. It's just to get people thinking, bring conversation back, right? And and in all honesty, make reading cool again, right? Make learning cool again, make knowledge cool again, because I feel like, reading a book and having conversations, intellectual conversations, not just, shooting the shit, but talking about deep topics, has really gone away. And we need to keep it in the forefront. If we let it disappear, man, we're going to end up like Idiocracy, having just dumbass conversations with dumbass people that are just stuck in the day-to-day matrix. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to be a part of that. I want something better than that. I want something bigger than that. I want something like this here in the background, something beautiful, something in sync with nature, not this where we're getting poisoned everywhere we turn our attention. So guys, like I said, thank you. And as always, stay strong and question everything.